Welcome to another episode of the History of Yu-Gi-Oh! In this episode, we're going to look at the history of the fire attribute by looking at some fun fact numbers, common themes of the attribute, and notable archetypes as well. So without further ado, let's do this. The fire attribute is one of the 6 main attributes in Yu-Gi-Oh! Obviously because fire is associated with heat, flames, lava, and well, fire of course, you can expect the majority of their monsters to be associated with these hot things, and typically a lot of red, orange, yellow, and any shades in between can be found in their artwork. Out of all the main attributes, fire is the least represented with only 606 fire monsters out of 7,055 monsters. This means that approximately only 8.5% out of all monsters in the game are fire attribute. The attribute is commonly associated with the machine, beast warrior, warrior, and of course the pyro type, but in more recent years the cybers type has also been a popular fire type. These 5 seem to be some of the most common types found in fire monsters, but a couple of others such as dragons and dinosaurs are not too far behind them. Specifically, the fire-pyro combination has had a rather comedic history of not really having a solid good archetype in all of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, and even popular pyros like volcanics have had a rather famous commenter on YouTube always asking for volcanic support because they seriously lack it. They really do. The polar opposite of fire is the water attribute, but it's mostly for lore purposes, as there are very few cards in the game that extend this opposite factor into the effects themselves. For example, Little Chimera and Little Chimera do reduce the stats of water monsters on the field, while also buffing up fire monsters. Elemental Hero Inferno gains attack only when battling water monsters, which directly means that the card works as an anti-water card. Obviously a very bad one, but it's still one regardless. And also, cards like Frost and Flame Dragon fit this idea thematically, as besides its name and artwork which clearly represent antithetical elements, it also requires 1 fire monster and 2 water monsters to special summon it. But beyond these, there aren't really too many cards that implement this whole polar opposite thing. Historically, a major consistent theme of fire monsters is to inflict burn damage to the opponent, meaning damage outside of battle. Which is very funny that an attribute that can literally burn you actually does burn you in terms of Yu-Gi-Oh terminology and gameplay. Some examples of fire monsters that can burn the opponent include Solar Flare Dragon, Cataclysmic Scorcher Sunburner, Fencing Fire Ferret, Lava Golem, Fire Sorcerer, and the powerful Blaze Phoenix the Burning Bombardment Bird. Oh, and for the memes, Abaki as well. There's a lot more too, such as many of the volcanic cards, but I'd probably be here all day if I list them all, so I'm not going to do that. Interestingly enough though, this concept does carry over to spells and traps as well, and even though technically speaking spells and traps aren't fire attribute because that's impossible, here's a few examples of cards that are fire based thematically that are also spell and trap cards, but are also burning the opponent for damage. Ukazi, Final Flame, Tremendous Fire, Ring of Destruction, the censored version at least, and Spiritual Fire Art Kurenai. The last one is noteworthy because there are actually 6 spiritual art cards in conjunction with the Charmer archetype, but only the fire one inflicts burn damage to the opponent. Another notable factor of fire monsters is that a large portion of them have specifically 200 defense. Out of the 606 fire monsters, 79 of those have 200 defense, which initially may not seem like a lot, but keep in mind that that's only one defense value, generally ranging from 0 to like 3000 in increments of 100. So overall this means that about 13% of fire monsters have 200 defense, while the other 87% is split among literally any other defense value in the game. That's a pretty high percentage honestly. So the question is, why exactly do a bunch of them have 200 defense? Well, to be honest, there's no clear answer, as it just sort of happened one day and Konami started to pump out support for them. Cards like Flameville Fire Dog and Rekindling are a great example of 200 defense support cards. The latter which has been borderline busted at times when great fire archetypes with 200 defense are released. This is a card that can easily get placed on the forbidden list one day, as the effect is basically a modified version of Soul Charge, only that card is banned because it's a lot more general. This situation is kind of like how Snake Rain sees no play, but it can become busted overnight if a great reptile archetype ever gets released. There have been several fire attribute archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, such as Flame Veils, Volcanics, Lavals, Evals, Jurax, Hazy, Fire Kings, Fire Fists, Shiranui, Ignites, Infernoids, Battle and Boxers, Metal Foes, Horus, and Salamangreats. Their overall competitive use historically has varied a lot, from archetypes like Jurax and Salamangreats being in way opposite ends of the spectrum. Despite the low representation of fire in general though, most fire archetypes have actually seen competitive success, whether it's been a complete deck of the archetype or at least an engine of one of those archetypes built into another deck. As previously mentioned, the problem of competitive viability has been a lot more so present in the pyro type as opposed to the fire attribute. It's also worth noting that there's been several archetypes released that initially seem like they're a fire attribute, based on their name and artwork, such as Burning Abyss, but in reality are not actually fire archetypes. In terms of general fire support, there's been several throughout the years. UFO Turtle is the main battle floater for bringing out weaker attack fire monsters. Bearer's Statue of the Inferno causes special summoning lockdowns for non-fire monsters. Blaster, Dragon Ruler of Infernos, is very flexible with fire monsters, and becomes even better when combined with dragons in the deck, and it's overall just too powerful, which is why it's actually forbidden to this day. Bonfire Colossus has an inherent special summoning condition, with its second effect being a downside unless you combine it with certain cards such as Fire King cards. Brushfire Knight allows you to mill fire monsters from the deck. Little Chimera, Doolittle Chimera, and Molten Destruction provide large stat boosts to fire monsters to allow them to hit even harder. Flame Ruler allows you to treat it as 2 tributes for the tribute summon of a fire monster, and their early spirit card released is Spirit of Flames. The attribute's Elemental Lord is Pyro Rex, the Elemental Lord, and the Monarchs include Thestalos, the Firestorm Monarch, and Thestalos, the Mega Monarch. The Familiar Possess archetype has specific fire support too, with cards like Familiar Possess Hida, Awakening of the Possessed Greater Inari Fire, Blazing Hida, and Spiritual Fire Art Kurenai, as previously mentioned. Some of these cards allow you to special summon themselves from the hand or deck by having specific criteria of spellcasters and or fire monsters on the field, while also sometimes causing a bit of burn damage. And a few more general fire support cards, some of which I've already mentioned before, include Hida the Fire Charmer Ablaze, Flame Spirit Ignis, Ultimate Baseball Kid, Birth of the Prominence Flame, Circle of the Fire Kings, Flame Veil Counter, Backfire, Kickfire, Rekindling, and Salamangreat Sunlight Wolf. Also, if you're looking for some really bad fire support cards, we have Invasion of Flames, which is a normal summon trap blocker card, and Salamandra and Burning Spear, which are equipped spells that simply increase the stats of fire monsters, which means they're pretty bad. Oh, and this last one isn't really a fire support card, but shoutouts to Ash Blossom for being one of the most used and useful hand traps in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! But it's also a fire monster, so technically speaking, fire-based decks can actually take advantage of it by having a little bit more synergy with these types of decks if you're creative enough. When it comes to sets released, typically it's been the red and orange themed main core sets that either have fire-based names or release fire attribute support and archetypes directly. Notable sets include Flaming Eternity, Crimson Crisis, Cosmo Blazer, Flames of Destruction, Ignition Assault, and Blazing Vortex. In terms of structure decks, Blaze of Destruction in 2005, Onslaught of the Fire Kings in 2013, and Soulburner in 2019 have been the main 3 decks released with the most fire support. And that's about it for when it comes to fire in terms of their history. Overall, it's underrepresented, we all know that, but their usefulness has always been surprisingly effective in some way, shape, or form toward decks that could take advantage of fire in general. I know many of us are always expecting things like more volcanic support or something that could take advantage of rekindling a lot, and as hopeful as I am, sometimes it just seems like Konami doesn't really care about buffing up this attribute in terms of representation, and instead they focus on other things like maybe dark and light support. But that's about it for the fire attribute. If you found this video helpful or entertaining, make sure to drop that like, comment, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. So before you ask, I'll definitely be making videos for the other attributes, so be on the lookout for that. I will see you all later.